Hey guys, welcome back to my channel Books with Meena, or welcome if you're new here. And today I'm going to be filming my January wrap up. So I read a total of 10 books in the month of January, and this was a great reading month, and 2022 started off pretty well in terms of my reading because I did read a huge number of books, more than usual, but also I loved a good number of them, and that's awesome. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. So the first book that I read was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This one is a well-known and well-loved classic. I feel like a lot of people have this book on their all-time favorites list, and I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This book is definitely very memorable. It's very complex. It's talking a lot about like philosophy and human nature, society, art, and interpretation of art. It talks about a bunch of things which were very interesting, and the way they were discussed in the book was also very interesting. The author doesn't like really hold your hand in these discussions. He just like drops a few quotable lines here and there, and you kind of have to like figure out what he's trying to say or what you want to interpret it as on your own. So I read this via audiobook, and I will say that I do want to go back and reread this book physically because I feel like I might absorb some things better in the physical format, and also like giving this book a reread will be definitely helpful in like visiting these like complex ideas and themes again and again, like thinking about them, because this is a thought-provoking book. So this book is about Dorian Gray, who is like really handsome and youthful and filled with all of like the good things that come with youth and beauty, and he is gifted this painting of himself by his friend, and every time Dorian does something bad, or as the story progresses, he ages, but none of that shows up on his physical form. All of these things show up on the painting, and that's like the kind of magical realism element of the book, and that's also like where the discussion starts of like narcissism and beauty and vanity, all of those things. I don't really have a lot to say about this book. I definitely do think that I'm not as like intellectual or smart as some people to like decode everything that happens in this book. What I can say is that this does have a very strong authorial voice, because the character goes on like many monologues, and it does feel like the author is the one speaking over here rather than the characters themselves. I also like really despised the character of like Harry or Henry, whatever his name is. I thought he, at times I agreed with him, and at times I just found him to be really despicable and pretentious, and he acted like he knew everything the best. So yeah, the second book that I read this month was The Wings of Ebony by J.L., and this one is YA urban fantasy. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. This book was very just familiar, and I want to say nostalgic in some ways, because it reminded me of like City of Bones and some other urban fantasies that I would read back in like middle grade. And while this book was familiar and it definitely had its own tropes and cliches, it was still unique and fresh enough that I enjoyed it for what it is. The main character, Rue, is, her mom passes away a year ago because of a gunshot, and Rue is taken away to this like hidden magical kingdom by her father, who turns out he is a god. And after a year of living in this magical world, really without her permission, she comes back to her like home, the real world, I guess you can say, to meet her younger sister, and that is where things go awry. The pacing of this book was on the faster side. We keep switching back and forth between the real world and the magical world, and Rue as our main protagonist was very likable and rootable, because at the end of the day, she's just trying to do what is best for her sister. She's trying to protect the people that she cares about. She's also very snarky and funny. She has like a witty inner dialogue going on, which was fun to read. I will say that the side characters don't seem as developed, and some of the relationships were more developed than the others. For instance, Rue and her younger sister's relationship was quite developed, I want to say. Even the one with her father, her estranged father, whom she doesn't really trust and like that much at the beginning of the book, she learns to like slowly trust him, and she learns more about him basically by the end of the book, and that was also a heartwarming, also like a heartbreaking relationship. There are hints of romance in this book, which like really, they're barely there, and they're not even done that well, so I didn't really care or bother with it. But there's like some friendships and everything. Overall, this book is, it's well written, it's good. If you're looking for a fun time, then definitely check this one out. The third book I read this month was The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This one is a well-known adult high fantasy standalone, and this one is about this mom and son. The mother is like, I want to say in her mid-30s, and the son is 14-15. They live in this very like patriarchal and secluded island called Kaigen. So the mom used to have a history of like violence and fighting. She used to go to the school abroad where she, became friends with a bunch of different people. But now that she is married, she has to like fulfill her role as like this domesticated, perfect housewife and mother. Whereas the son, who is like on the cusp of almost becoming an adult, he is having to like, bear with the responsibility of, he has to become a great warrior because they come from a great family. Because they come from a great warrior family. There is also a war brewing on the horizon where our main characters don't really know what's going to happen. There seems to be, there are some secrets that are being kept from the citizens of Kaigen from the government. And that is where this book starts. And I will say that the magic and the world building is nothing special or new or unique. It is pretty standard, I want to say, because like I said, there are these different kingdoms and empires and they all exist with each other. There's some war, coming, in the near future. And as for the magic system, it's basically elemental magic where people can control fire, water, air, and wind. So I did have like a few, I want to say, like nitpicks or problems with this book, especially in terms of pacing, because the first 20% of this book is kind of slow and there are a lot of info dumps in the first 20%, and then at the 30-40% mark till the 60% mark, I want to say like the big like middle chunk of the book is filled with a lot of action. It's basically like one continuous action sequence, and if you're somebody who does love a lot of action in your fantasy, then I do think that you will like this book. But for me, I just don't really care that much about action. I want to see more about the characters and the politics, so that was a little tough for me to read to get through that middle part. But I will say that it was pretty like gutsy of the author to like take this kind of step and pace the book in such a way where like majority of the action happens in the middle portion, and the ending of the book is more slow and introspective and very much focused on the characters. So where this book shines the most is the characters and how emotionally invested I was in their journeys. This is primarily, in my opinion, a coming of age story, both for the mom and the son. Both of them are questioning what they have been taught for so long, and they're trying to find their place in society. They're trying to come to terms with what they can provide to society and how they fit into this like environment where there's a lot of turmoil, and obviously there's some danger coming in the near future. And it was just so heartbreaking, and it's also pretty like rare to see a mom and a mother-son relationship in fantasy novels, and I really appreciated that. I thought that was very well portrayed. The characters felt fleshed out and real. Their journeys were just top notch, and yeah, I cried reading this book a couple of times, and that definitely shows how invested I was in the story and how much I cared about what happened to these characters. And clearly, if you can't tell, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Overall, there were definitely some flaws in this book, but I could overlook them because the good parts in this book were like so good that I totally fell in love with the story. In terms of writing and accessibility, this book is very accessible. It's a little bit on the longer side, but since it's a fantasy standalone, I do think it's not like a huge undertaking to read this novel. And the writing is also pretty simple and straightforward, and it reads pretty fluently. The fourth book I read this month was Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers, and this one is a Christian historical romance. I do have an exclusive separate review for this book on my channel, and I did review the movie too. So if you want to watch that for my more in-detail thoughts, then definitely go check out that video. Other than that, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Again, I have similar feelings for this as The Sword of Kaigen, where this book had flaws and there were some things that I didn't really like about this book, but overall it left me with like positive, heartwarming feelings, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The fifth book that I read this month is Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. This one is a YA high fantasy, and I think it's a standalone, though there could be a sequel coming out. I'm not quite sure about that, but this book can definitely be read as a standalone. And this one is a Goose Girl retelling. You're following the antagonist from the original fairy tale, Vanya, who was the servant girl who stole Giselle's identity as the princess. And so you're following Vanya at the beginning of this book, and she is pretending to be this like rich noble woman, and she is stealing from the nobility. There are also other things going on in this book apart from this like heist kind of plotline. So you have like this police investigation happening into these robberies, and Vanya is scared that she might get caught. On the other hand, she also gets cursed by this goddess that if she doesn't give back what she has taken from people, then she will be cursed to turn into a statue of gemstones. There are a couple of different things happening in this book, plus this is a fairy tale retelling, but it never felt like I was overwhelmed with the story. It almost the The author, wove everything like very seamlessly, all of these different plot threads and plot points. I think they mishmashed well together. The writing and feel of this book is also very cozy. It's like taking place, it's very familiar. It's like this medieval European setting, and there's nobility, there's politics, there's, a lot of balls and gowns and, that kind of stuff. Plus, the main character, Vanya, is very likable. She definitely is an anti-heroine because she does things that are quite questionable and she has to, pay for them. But she does have, like, I want to say, almost a redemption arc in the story. Even though you do get, where she is coming from, why she made these choices. This book also does talk about classism because Vanya used to be a servant girl and now she is living among the nobility. So you get to see the power dynamics of the rich and the powerful and the poor and those who are not so much, don't really have that much power. And I thought the whole classism aspect of the book was really portrayed well and done well, seen from the eyes of someone who had been on the other side of things and had suffered at the hands of these people who hold a lot of power. Plus, there's like an adorable romance in this book. It's kind of, I want to say, enemies to lovers. And typically, this is not a trope that I really enjoy. But this book did it so well, and the characters were like so adorable and enjoyable together that I could not help but fall for it. It was just so cute. And Eric as the love interest was just, so heartwarming. There are even some like heartwarming found family and friendship dynamics, and that was also just like so fun to read about. And this book reminded me of why I had fallen in love with YA high fantasy a couple of years ago, because I don't think I have had this much luck with reading a YA high fantasy in quite some time. And this book reminded me that yes, I do still love this genre. I do still really like reading about fantasy worlds and high plot lines and following characters in these whimsical magical atmospheres. So if you can't tell, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely recommend it. If you're looking for something that, does have those like YA fantasy feels to it, but is like more mature and does some things different, the way this book integrates the whole retelling aspect I thought was done so well. The main character, Vanya, she's flawed. Like I said, she is an anti-heroine and she kind of gets her redemption journey. But she's so flawed and fleshed out, three-dimensional. She has walls built up around herself and she's slowly learning to like tear them down throughout this book. The 6th book that I read this month was Yes and I Love You by Ronnie Lauren. This one is an adult contemporary romance. And this one I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. You're following Holland in this, who has Tourette syndrome. And she writes these online reviews for like movies and TV shows and the local entertainment in her city. But her boss wants her to, post videos of these reviews online so that, people will engage with it more and, she will get more views. Holland does not want to do this because she feels like, she's not very comfortable in front of people. She can get very awkward and her tics start showing up. So she's not very confident in front of camera and people. This is where our love interest enters, and I don't know his name. I forgot his name, but he is this like aspiring actor. He's an improv artist and he is working at this like local coffee shop near her office. So he decides to help her. Become more comfortable with her skin and expressing herself, and that is where this romance starts. I don't really have a lot to say about this book other than it was sweet, cute, it had some steamy scenes, it was a good time. I enjoyed it. The characters had a lot of chemistry, a lot of banter, there was some definitely, I want to say, more like heavy emotional parts to this book with the main characters, families and their backstories, and there was also some good representation with Tourette syndrome and ADHD, although I cannot speak for it for myself, but definitely check out some reviews on Goodreads or other places. The one complaint I would have is that the middle portion conflict in the book kind of dragged the story down for me a little bit. It felt unnecessary and like it came out of nowhere. Other than that, the third act conflict, which is the main conflict that happens in romance books at the end, that one felt pretty, it made sense to me and it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere. It was easily wrapped up and I liked that. So yeah, overall 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I enjoyed reading this book, but I don't think it's something that I will remember for a long time to come. The 7th book that I read this month is If I Never Met You by Very McFarlane, and this one is a reread, as you all must know if you have seen some of my previous videos. Very McFarlane is a favorite author of mine. She is like my #1 author to go to if I want to read something cozy and fun. If I Never Met You is a fake dating office romance. This one is about Laurie. She is 36 and she has been dating her boyfriend, her current boyfriend, for 18 years. But at the beginning of the book, he breaks up with her, and 2 months later, he is with a new woman, and that woman is pregnant with his baby. And this leaves Laurie heartbroken. Add a cherry on top of that cake, she and her ex work at the same office, so everybody gets to know. And now Laurie looks a little pathetic and she's not feeling so good about herself. So she decides to fake date this like younger stud in the office. He's kind of a womanizer, but not really. He's basically, he's hot, he's younger-ish, and he also like does not really commit to relationships. If you read the book, you will get to know why they decide to, set up this whole fake dating thing. Both of them have something to gain out of it. And I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars, which is not a big surprise because I usually really love reading Very McFarlane's books. Her characters just feel so real and raw and honest. It feels like they can exist there out in the world, and you must know these people because they feel so real. The progression of all the relationships in this book felt very natural. The romance, it starts off with Laurie and Charlie, who is the love interest. At the beginning, they are more like, just people who know each other because they work in the same office. But then, slowly they form this like business partnership almost with their fake dating. They don't immediately trust each other, but nor are they hostile towards each other. And I really appreciated that about this book, because oftentimes in romance stories, I feel like if the characters don't fall under the trope of friends to lovers, they have to fall under the trope of enemies to lovers. And it doesn't have to be like that. Sometimes you don't trust people, but sometimes you also like don't hate them, and that's just how it is. There's a lot more nuance to relationships and friendships than friends or enemies. Charlie as a love interest was absolutely charming. I typically don't love characters like his who are playboys or womanizers, whatever you want to call them, but he was just charming, and I really liked the romance, as you can tell. Fake dating is something that I don't really enjoy in romance. I don't know why. A lot of people love this trope, but it's not one of my favorites. But if there was ever a book where I could enjoy fake dating in, it would be a book obviously written by Very McFarlane, because it was done so well. It felt like there were actual stakes over here, and the characters are thinking through of like how they would present themselves to to other people. They are in an office or professional setting, and there are actual stakes because their jobs are on the line. Now I will say this is not exactly a romance book, even though romance is a pretty important plotline in this. It feels more of like a coming of age and self journey kind of a story for Laurie. She is trying to figure herself out and what she wants in life. She is learning to prioritize herself and really work for her happiness and not damp down her happiness or her choices for someone else. The 8th book that I read this month is Let's Call It a Doomsday by Katie Henry, and this one is YA contemporary. It's about Alice, who believes in doomsday and she keeps preparing for it. She has a lot of anxiety of like things going south and turning out bad, and she is in therapy for that. Her parents are obviously very concerned, and this book is a lot about how people suffering with mental illness are they have such a hard time they have a very hard time navigating the world and trying to make people understand where they are coming from. But at the same time, it also explores the familial dynamics, how Alice's family is also having a hard time understanding her and adapting to her behavior. In the beginning of this book, I was kind of confused because Alice meets this girl called Hannah from her school, and Hannah also believes in doomsday, and she is seeing visions of the future where this apocalypse is going to happen, and both of them are trying to prepare for it and understand what these visions mean. So I was confused because I was like, is this magical realism? Is this sci-fi? Is the doomsday actually going to happen? But this book isn't really, it's not really magical realism. It's straight up a YA contemporary, and its main focus is on mental health. How some things are not diagnosable, how some things, other people can't understand, but everyone deserves empathy and everybody deserves to be listened to. And as a young adult book where the characters are pretty young, they are 16, I do think this book is doing a good job of talking about mental health. Other than that, I don't really have a lot to say. This book had good writing, good characters, it had like good realistic familial dynamics. This book does also talk about religion because our main character is Mormon and she is questioning her sexuality, and I thought that was also dealt with in a sensitivity and lightheartedness that it made for a good reading experience, while also fleshing out this kind of an experience that I do think a lot of people have, obviously. So I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The second to last book I read this month is This Will Be Funny Someday by, again, Katie Henry. And this one is also a YA contemporary. You're following the main character whose name I can't remember because, there are a lot of main characters to talk about today. But she is, she feels very neglected. She is in an abusive relationship with her boyfriend, and she feels like her parents don't really give her that much attention. They are more so involved with their jobs and her elder siblings. She doesn't really stand out in school, but at the beginning of this book, she kind of stumbles upon stand-up comedy and she performs on stage, and turns out, she's kind of good at it. She makes new friends who are in college, but she lies to them about her age, pretending that she is also in college instead of in high school. And that is where this book starts. This book does show the whole stand-up comedy scene, and I thought that was very interesting and new. I don't think I've read a lot of books where stand-up comedy is portrayed. This book delves into the representation and the kind of discrimination that people of color, queer people and women face in this field, where they are tokenized and put into boxes, and I thought that was a good conversation to have. Plus, other than that, I think this book is like the perfect example of a coming of age, the main character breaking out of their shell kind of a story, because a lot of YA books are about that, and a lot of them don't really do it that well. The story doesn't really feel unique or that new. Main character feels, lonely, and they don't really stand out that much, but throughout the book they figure out that, oh, I'm good at this, and they kind of start breaking out of their shell. It's a pretty standard plot line, especially for teenage characters, but everything was just done so well. The familial dynamics, the friendships, the portrayal of a toxic relationship in which the main character rationalizes a lot of things, and she is trying to get out of it but is having a hard time doing so because she does feel attached to her boyfriend. Then we have the whole shenanigans part of the book, where the main character, obviously she is lying to her new friends, so she has to make up more lies and go through some non-ideal situations to keep up with her lies. I did think that the ensemble cast of the side characters was really well written. They all jumped out of the page and were a lot of fun to read about. If there was one critique I would have of this book, it was a very small one, but I do think that the main character became really good at stand-up comedy really fast, and I found that to be a little unbelievable. I don't really know a lot about stand-up comedy, so maybe some people are naturally talented at it and get good at it really fast. But yeah, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I will say though that even though this book was perfect in my eyes and they didn't really do anything wrong or something that I didn't like, it was definitely a book that was doing a lot of things very good, but not outstanding in any one aspect. So it might not be something that sticks with me, but I can still recommend this book to a lot of people. The last book that I read this month was Not My Problem by Kiara Smith. This one is also YA contemporary, and I listened to this on audiobook, and let me tell you, the audiobook narration for this book was amazing. You're following Aideen, who has some problems back at home. Her mom is, kind of going back into her alcoholism, and they are poor, so they're having to make ends meet with little amount of money. But in school, Aideen is able to solve other people's problems, which is why she kind of starts this underground business, you can say, of helping other students with their problems, hence the title of this book. And this book was just laugh out loud funny. I enjoyed it so much. That is the ensemble cast of this book is done so well. Any book that can make me laugh out loud in public while listening to the audiobook deserves a 5 out of 5 star from me. Aideen as a character was super entertaining to read about because she's very snarky and witty, has this really sarcastic sense of humor. If you can't tell, I really love those type of characters who are, very snarky and sarcastic on the outside. They have this hard exterior, but on the inside they're just really good people with mushy-cushy hearts. There is an adorable romance in this book too. It's also kind of, I want to say, hate to love, not exactly, but the two main characters are definitely opposites, with Aideen being more laid back and snarky, like I said, and the other character, Maeve, she is more uptight and responsible. She is a straight A student and she's running for the student body president. And so they bicker a lot, they banter a lot. This book also has a lot of shenanigans because the main character has to get into, again, some non-ideal situations to help out her friends, and those parts were definitely very funny and very entertaining to read about. And talking more on the heavier side of the book with portrayal of having a neglectful parent and one parent who is completely absent, living in poverty. I think those things were also handled with, a lot of care, and I appreciated that kind of representation in this book, even though again I can't really speak for it. But I appreciated that this book talked about it, and it wasn't something that was brushed under the rug. We definitely get to see depictions of how 18 has like molded her life around her mother, to take care of her mother, because she doesn't really know what else to do. And that has definitely led to problems in her school life, where she is lagging behind on her studies and hasn't really paid much attention to her life, her dreams, her goals, and her hobbies. So yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this book. If I had to say, like, my 2 favorite books from this month were definitely Little Thieves by Margaret Owen and Not My Problem by Kiara Smith. And I'm so happy I read a lot of good books this month. And that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Comment down below what you read in the month of January, and be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe if you wish to do so. And that is it. Goodbye.